My name is Cora Sterling, and for as long as I can remember, the world has felt like a room I entered just after the joke was told. I was raised in a house that was technically a home, by people who were technically my family, but I always felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. A shadow in the family portrait. My mother, Beatrice, once orchestrated a public spectacle in a hospital lobby, her voice a carefully sharpened weapon, accusing me of letting my sister die. My father, Richard, a man whose silence was more condemning than any shout, stood beside her and pronounced me a regrettable error. They were there to pressure me, to shame me, to demand a part of my liver for my sister, Chloe. The same sister who once told a group of girls at school that I was a foster kid they'd taken in out of pity, years before I even knew I was adopted. She laughed then, a bright, tinkling sound, when my face crumpled in confusion. But the moment that truly fractured the foundation of my life came down to 6 words from a doctor, and the sound of my mother's composure finally shattering when the performance was over and the truth could no longer be contained. What do you do when you discover your entire existence was a contingency plan? That you weren't a daughter, but an insurance policy? I remained seated in that uncomfortable vinyl chair, a single, frozen point in the swirling chaos of the hospital lobby. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, felt thin in my lungs, each breath a privilege I hadn't earned. Shreds of paper, pages from my own medical file that Beatrice had thrown to the floor in a fit of theatrical despair, lay around my feet like fallen leaves. They were receipts for a transaction I had never consented to. Beatrice loomed over me, her chest heaving not with genuine grief, but with the practiced rhythm of a seasoned performer. Her voice, when it came, was designed to cut through the ambient noise, to draw an audience. "Do you think you have the right to sit there and play the victim?" she hissed, the words slicing through the hushed waiting area. "Your sister is fighting for her life, Cora. Dying. And you are doing nothing. Absolutely nothing." My gaze drifted past her, scanning the faces of the strangers who were now part of her audience. A young nurse pretending to organize a stack of pamphlets. A man holding his child's hand a little tighter. The receptionist whose fingers tapped a frantic, meaningless rhythm on her keyboard. I saw it in their eyes, the discomfort, the pity, and the swift, easy judgment. No one ever stepped in. That was a familiar feeling. I bent down, my movements slow and deliberate, and began to gather the scattered pages. Not because I felt guilty, but because I needed them. I needed proof, a record, something tangible that couldn't be bent and reshaped into another one of their stories. My hand trembled, but only slightly. It was a tremor of adrenaline, not fear. Beatrice took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if the intimacy of the tone could mask the manipulation. "I didn't raise you to be so cold, so ungrateful. We gave you everything." I looked up then, meeting her gaze directly. My own voice was quiet, devoid of the emotion she was trying to provoke. "You gave me what you decided I owed you for." She blinked. Just once. And in that blink, there was a flicker of silence. Not peace, not understanding, but the hollow vacuum left when her manufactured outrage had nowhere to land. Then came the scream she'd been holding in reserve. "You are letting your sister die." It echoed, just as she knew it would. A security guard down the hall turned his head. A doctor paused mid-stride. Beatrice's voice was a headline, a public condemnation. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, because I knew this was not the first time she had performed her sorrow, and I would not be the one to give her an encore. From behind the glass wall of her room down the hall, I could see Chloe. Chemotherapy had stripped away her vibrant complexion, leaving her pale, but it hadn't touched the cool composure in her eyes. She lay against the pillows, seemingly weak, but her gaze was sharp as it found mine. She offered a small, faint smile. It wasn't a smile of gratitude or hope. It was a smile of ownership. It was the same look she'd given me her entire life, the one that said, "I am still the center of this universe, and you are just a moon, caught in my orbit." I had, for a foolish moment, expected some sign of desperation from her, perhaps even a sliver of kindness. But seeing that look, smug, satisfied, even in her illness, it didn't break me. It did something far stranger. It unearthed a strength I had forgotten I possessed. Slowly, I stood, the gathered papers held firmly in my hand. Beatrice's breathing, which had been so erratic moments before, steadied as she transitioned from righteous fury to martyred silence. "You will regret this, Cora," she said softly, her eyes fixed on some distant point over my shoulder. "One day, when she's gone, when this family you've torn apart is nothing but a memory, you'll remember this moment and you'll despise yourself." I tilted my head, not in mockery, but in genuine curiosity. "That's funny," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "I remember a lot of moments, and none of them felt like family." With that, I turned and walked away. Not toward Chloe's room, not toward my mother, not even toward the main exit. I walked toward the nurse's station at the far end of the corridor. The small crowd of onlookers parted wordlessly. The young nurse who had been closest to the scene met my gaze for a fleeting second. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it. I didn't need her words. I didn't need anyone's. Everything I had ever wanted to argue, every defense I'd ever wanted to mount, was already scattered on the floor behind me, torn, yet somehow more whole than the family they had tried to build. As I reached the end of the hall, I paused. The clock on the wall read 10:42 a.m. I remember that small detail because I remember thinking, this is the moment it all breaks. Not when they screamed at me, but when I didn't scream back. I didn't collapse. I simply walked. And as my foot crossed the threshold into the adjoining hallway, a chilling certainty settled over me. They weren't here to save Chloe. They were here to prove I could still be controlled. But the next blow didn't come from Beatrice. It came from my father. I hadn't made it 10 feet past the nurse's station when I felt his presence behind me. He didn't say my name. He rarely did, at least not with any warmth. He just stood there, his posture ramrod straight, a man who moved through the world as if it owed him deference for the air he breathed. His shadow fell across the polished linoleum in front of me, and I stopped. I stopped because a small, foolish part of me still hoped he might finally say something real, something not rehearsed or weaponized to herd me back into compliance. Instead, he stated it like a fact, his voice low and devoid of heat. "You were always a selfish mistake." No anger, no accusation. It wasn't an insult hurled in a moment of passion. It was a summary judgment, delivered with the quiet conviction of a long-held belief he no longer had the energy to disguise. I blinked, but the tears I had spent a lifetime suppressing refused to fall. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I didn't ask him to explain. That would have granted him the dignity of my disbelief. Instead, I let his words wash over me like quick-drying cement, heavy but hardening fast. I wouldn't let them sink in. Behind him, Chloe's room was still illuminated, a stage for a drama I was no longer willing to act in. She hadn't moved. She didn't have to. Her work was done. I stepped around him, careful not to brush his shoulder. In the past, that small act would have felt like defiance. Now, it just felt like maintaining my own space, my own air, my own body. As I walked away, I could feel the weight of every year I'd spent in their house pressing against my back, a ghostly hand trying to push me down the path of apology. I just kept walking. Near the family consultation lounge, I stopped at a water fountain, not to drink, but just to breathe. And that's when my mind, a traitorous archivist, started flipping through old files. A family trip to the coast when I was 10. Chloe got the ocean view room. I got the small room facing the parking lot. Beatrice said I was too quiet to appreciate the sound of the waves. My 16th birthday. Chloe got a used but charming convertible. I got a savings bond. Richard said, "You don't have anywhere to go anyway." The acceptance letter to the university I dreamed of, the one I never saw because Chloe had accidentally spilled a whole mug of coffee on it before I got home from school. Beatrice had believed her, of course. Be grateful, they'd always said. We didn't have to take you in. Even before I knew the truth of my adoption, I understood the subtext. I was a debt they had chosen to acquire, and I was expected to spend my life paying it off. I didn't realize I was leaning against the cool wall until a passing doctor gave me a concerned glance. He didn't stop. No one asked if I was okay, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't want to witness to this quiet unraveling. I needed it to be entirely my own. My hands were steady now as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I scrolled through my emails, my thumb hovering over a subject line I knew by heart: National Organ Registry, match results, confidential. It was dated 6 months ago. From the day I first heard Chloe was sick, the day I went and got tested on my own, before anyone had the chance to ask. Before they could send guilt to my door like a debt collector. I hadn't told them. I thought, naively, that if I wasn't a match, the conversation would end before it began. I tapped open the email, forwarded it to my friend Maya, a lawyer who had become my emergency contact for the emotional wreckage I'd learned to anticipate. My subject line was simple, for the record: reconfirming non-compatibility. Before hitting send, I stared at the screen at my own name, Cora Sterling. Not Chloe's sister. Not Beatrice's daughter. Just Cora. I hit send. When I looked up, my father was gone. My mother, too. I pictured them regrouping, planning their next wave of emotional blackmail, or perhaps meeting with a hospital administrator to spin a tale of my instability. They had spent my entire life convincing others I was fragile and dramatic. I had spent my life trying to be the opposite: calm, rational, quiet. But in that moment, I realized something that settled deep in my bones. I didn't want their approval anymore. Their disappointment no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a compass. It proved I had finally walked far enough from their toxic orbit to see the shape of their universe. Back in the main lobby, the receptionist from earlier offered me a tentative smile. "Do you need a pass to go back up?" I shook my head. "No. I'm just stepping out for a while." "Will you be back?" she asked, her tone professional but laced with a hint of curiosity. I considered her question, not just for today, but for all the days to come. "I'll let you know," I said, and walked through the sliding glass doors. Outside, the Portland air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming rhododendrons. It was a smell that grounded me in the real world, a world away from the sterile hum and recycled air of the hospital. When I reached the parking garage, I remembered I hadn't driven. I had taken a rideshare, not trusting my own hands on the wheel that morning. I called another. The app said it was 5 minutes away. Enough time for one more thing. I opened the Notes app on my phone and began to type. If they ever claim I refused without cause, here is the timeline. Tested, October 19th. Results received, October 24th. National Registry confirms I am not a compatible donor. Then, without overthinking it, I added a few more lines. You cannot donate what you do not have. You cannot love where you are not permitted to exist. And you cannot stay where you were never truly welcome. I saved the note. The car pulled up to the curb. I got in and gave the driver the address of a small, quiet coffee shop several blocks away. I needed a moment not to escape, but to anchor myself. They wanted to cast me as the villain of their story. But I wasn't going to play the part. I had my facts. I had my proof. And soon, I would have my voice. Not the one that had always whispered for me to stay small, but the one that had been quietly clearing its throat for 28 years. They thought I was a mistake. But I was about to show them what a mistake looks like when it finally stops apologizing for its own existence. Instead of the coffee shop, I found myself on a park bench across the street from the hospital, near a bus stop that seemed perpetually empty. I didn't want to go anywhere. I just needed to be somewhere I wasn't being watched, where the echoes of their voices couldn't find me. I pulled my jacket tighter, a subconscious need to feel an embrace that asked for nothing in return. That's when my phone buzzed. I expected a text from Maya, but the notification was an email. The subject line was stark: "Saw your name in a post. Thought you might need this." It was from Isabel Garcia. We hadn't spoken in 15 years, not since her family moved to Arizona the summer before our junior year. She was the only friend I'd ever had who had seen the cracks in my family's perfect facade and hadn't looked away. The email was brief. "Cora, I've held on to this." I wasn't sure if it still mattered, but when I saw a post from a mutual friend about Chloe being sick, I had a feeling it might. Attached were 2 scanned images. The first was a page from a diary, written in Isabel's neat, looping cursive. At the top, she had written, "For Cora, after the fall down the stairs." Underneath was a short, factual account of what she had witnessed that afternoon at my house. Beatrice's sharp, angry shout, the sound of a thud, and the chillingly calm way Chloe had called for our mother as I lay on the landing, trying to catch my breath. The second image stole the air from my lungs. It was a faded Polaroid. In it, a younger me, maybe 14, was lifting my shirt to show a dark, sprawling bruise across my ribs. On the white border at the bottom, in faint ink, was the date, May 16, 2008. I had forgotten that photo even existed. I had forgotten she'd taken it, her face a mask of quiet fury, after I'd shown her the proof that I wasn't just being dramatic. I stared at the screen until the images blurred. It wasn't tears. It was the overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen, after a lifetime of being told my reality was a fiction. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't exaggerated. It happened. It was real. I scrolled up and reread Isabel's email. Just a few lines. She was never one for drama, only for the truth. I opened the voice recorder on my phone, letting it rest on my knee. The city sounds filled the silence, a passing bus, the distant siren, the murmur of pedestrians. And then I started to speak, my voice low and even. They always said I was the dramatic one. That I exaggerated, that I invented stories because I couldn't handle the truth. But I handled it. I handled it by being quiet. Too quiet. I paused, taking a breath. They taught me that pain was a performance. That unless it was loud and messy, it didn't count. But bruises fade. The lies, they linger. My hands were perfectly still. I saved the recording, labeling it Statement Draft 1. Then I opened a blank email. I didn't have a recipient in mind yet, the hospital ethics board, Maya, maybe even the press if it came to that. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. It was about reclaiming the narrative. They had taught me how to keep their secrets, but they had forgotten that secrets, once written down, have a life of their own. By the time I stood up from the bench, my spine felt straighter, my shoulders less burdened. The anger had receded, replaced by a sense of alignment. I started walking, with no destination in mind, just the steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement, a physical act of moving forward. As I passed a bookstore, my phone vibrated again. A text from Maya. Still breathing? A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I typed back, yes. For now. I kept walking as the afternoon light softened and the sky turned a bruised purple. Dusk was settling over Portland when I found myself back in front of the hospital. The lights inside were beginning to glow, turning the windows into warm, golden squares. I didn't go in. Not yet. I pulled out my phone one last time, opened the email from Isabel, and saved the attachments to a secure folder I named, simply, They Knew. Because they did. They knew what Chloe was capable of, what Beatrice actively protected, what Richard willfully ignored. They didn't just allow it to happen. They orchestrated the silence that followed. They hadn't just forgotten what they did to me. They had counted on me forgetting. But I hadn't. And now, I was ready to make sure no one else would either. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked back into the hospital, past the front desk, and took the elevator to the oncology floor. I didn't pause at the doorway to Chloe's room this time. I walked straight in. She was awake, propped up against her pillows, idly flipping through a magazine. Her eyes, cool and assessing, met mine. There was no surprise in them. I know I'm not a match, I said. My voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. Her expression didn't change. Not a flicker of guilt, not a hint of remorse. You knew the whole time, I continued. You got the email from the registry 6 months ago. You saw the results. And you said nothing. Still, she was silent. You let them drag me here. You watched them humiliate me in the hallway. You let our mother scream at me that I was letting you die, knowing it was all a lie. She finally lowered the magazine, placing it on the bed beside her. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. You still showed up, didn't you? The sheer, unvarnished audacity of that question hung in the air between us. She hadn't needed to lie. She hadn't needed to scream. She just needed to set the stage and wait for me to play my part. I came, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, because I thought there was still something worth believing in. Not because of you. And certainly not for them. She tilted her head, a gesture of mock curiosity. You always make everything about you, Cora. I took a single step closer to the bed, not in aggression, but to ensure she heard every word. I sent the documents to the hospital's ethics board. The original registry results. The timestamps showing when your mother opened the email. Your text history from that week. I didn't just come to fight, Chloe. I came with receipts. For the first time, something shifted in her gaze. It wasn't fear. It was annoyance. I was an unforeseen complication, a loose thread in her carefully woven narrative. As I turned to leave, I said one last thing over my shoulder. You didn't win. You just ran out of lies. I walked out of the room and didn't look back. Downstairs, in a quiet alcove near the chapel, I sat and composed another round of emails. One to the hospital's legal department. One to the chief of medicine. A final, comprehensive one to Maya. Each email contained every document, every date, every fact. By mid-afternoon, the hospital had responded with a formal acknowledgement. An internal investigation would be launched immediately. The email concluded with a sterile, corporate sentence. We take all allegations of ethical misconduct seriously. I stared at the words for a long moment. It was never just about ethics. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to be used as a tool to mend someone else's broken morality. By 4 p.m., I was drafting a formal legal affidavit, a statement to be made under oath. I wrote it without embellishment, without emotion, just the cold, hard facts. I detailed the withheld test results, the coordinated emotional abuse, the long history of manipulation. And at the very end, I added a line that wasn't legally necessary, but was essential for me. This is not a daughter's rebellion. It is a woman's refusal to be erased. If they wanted a war, they had chosen the wrong person. They should have picked someone who hadn't already spent a lifetime surviving one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window of my small apartment, watching the rain wash the city streets clean. The folder from the hospital lay on my kitchen table, a silent testament to the storm that had finally broken. I wasn't their daughter. I was their failsafe, their living leverage. And now, for the first time, I had something they couldn't control: paperwork. The next morning, my steps were measured as I walked back into Bridgeview Medical Center. I went straight to the administration floor and asked to speak with Dr. Eris Thorne. He saw me within minutes, his expression grave as he led me into his office. I reviewed the complete file again last night, he began, his voice professional but tinged with something that sounded like regret. There's something else. It's highly irregular. He turned his monitor to face me. On the screen was a scanned document with the hospital's letterhead. At the top, my name was typed neatly. Below it, the words medical power of attorney. And at the bottom, a signature, Cora Sterling. It was dated 4 weeks prior. My blood ran cold. That's not my signature. Dr. Thorne didn't look surprised. It doesn't match any of the signatures we have on file for you. The document was submitted by a family member when Chloe was readmitted. My jaw tightened. Who submitted it? Your mother. Beatrice Sterling. Of course. A forgery. A blatant, desperate attempt to seize control, to authorize whatever they wanted without ever needing my consent again. My voice was a blade. I need a printed copy of that. He handed it to me without a word. This is being added to my official complaint, I told him. With the hospital board and with my attorney. He gave a single, solemn nod. We will cooperate fully. I've already notified our legal team. I walked out of his office with the forged document clutched in my hand. In a quiet waiting area, I took a photo of it and sent it to Maya. They forged my consent. This just became much bigger. Her reply was instantaneous. Do I call the press, or are we still pretending they have a soul? A dry, mirthless smile touched my lips. Let's start with the ethics board, I typed back. Then we'll see what burns first. I stood up and headed back towards the main floor. Just as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw it. The hospital's media room, normally quiet, was buzzing with activity. A small podium was set up, a banner behind it reading, Bridgeview Medical Center, a community of gratitude. And there, behind the microphone, stood Beatrice, poised and elegant in a navy dress. Richard was at her side, his posture rigid. On a large monitor beside them, a live feed showed Chloe, looking frail and beatific in her hospital bed. I hadn't been told about any press conference. I moved closer, staying just out of the camera's line of sight, and listened as my mother began to speak. "We are so deeply grateful to the anonymous donor who came forward," Beatrice said, her voice filled with a practiced, noble quiver. "Because of their selfless generosity and the incredible team here at Bridgeview, our daughter Chloe has been given a second chance at life." Anonymous. The word hit me like a physical blow. "This journey," she continued, "has reminded us of the power of compassion, the strength of family, and the importance of love." No mention of me. Not even a hint. I was watching myself be erased in real time. Richard stepped forward. In times of hardship, it can be easy to cast blame. But true character is shown in quiet grace. "We want to focus now on healing, not on division." They were burying me with applause. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm. I waited by a side exit. When the press conference ended and the room began to clear, I saw Beatrice step out, smiling and accepting condolences from a hospital board member. I approached her, my voice low but clear. "You knew I was in the building." She didn't flinch. Her smile tightened. "You forfeited your right to be a part of this family, Cora." The cruelty was no longer veiled. It was a statement of fact. My hand was already on my phone, ready to forward the video of the press conference to Maya. Beatrice's eyes darted to the screen, and her composure finally snapped. Her hand shot out and she smacked the phone from my grasp. It clattered to the marble floor, the screen shattering with a sickening crack. A few people turned. A nurse gasped. Beatrice stared down at my broken phone, her chest heaving. Her voice was a venomous whisper. "You just have to ruin everything, don't you?" I looked at her, not with fear or sadness, but with a profound and startling calm. "You already did that for me." I knelt, slowly gathered the pieces of my phone, and stood. A security guard was hurrying towards us. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" he asked. I held up the shattered device. "Please log this. I will be filing for a restraining order today." Beatrice's face went pale. The performance was over. The audience was no longer on her side. "I'll handle it myself," I told the guard, and walked past my mother, the broken phone cradled in my hand like a relic. The hallway had never felt so long. When I stepped outside into the pale sunlight, I didn't rush. I sat on a bench, pulled out the hospital's guest tablet I still had in my bag, and logged into my email. Maya had already sent me a link to the press conference recording. I forwarded it to her, along with the photo of the broken phone. They had erased my name, but I was about to carve the truth in stone. I walked straight from that bench back into the hospital, the shattered pieces of my phone in my pocket. I didn't glance at the lingering attendees of the press event. I took the elevator back to the administrative floor. Dr. Thorne was waiting for me at the end of the hall, a single folder in his hand. His face was grim. "Thank you for coming back up," he said, leading me into a small, windowless consultation room. I didn't want this to get lost in another email. He sat down and opened the folder. "There's a conflict in the genetic markers," he began, his voice gentle. "We reran all the original tests to be certain. Twice." I didn't speak. I felt a strange sense of calm, the quiet that comes before a storm you've seen brewing on the horizon your whole life. "Cora," he said, meeting my eyes. "You are not biologically related to them. At all." 6 words. That was all it took. The room didn't tilt. The world didn't spin. Instead, something inside me settled, a final piece of a puzzle clicking into place after a lifetime of being misshapen. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor, but of a deep, profound, and painful recognition. "Well," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That explains everything." He nodded slowly, giving me space to process. But I didn't need to. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just sat there, letting the truth wash over me, cleansing away decades of confusion and self-doubt. "I'll need all the official documentation," I said finally. "Printed and digital." "You'll have it," he promised. I left his office with a new folder tucked under my arm and made my way back down to the media room. It was mostly empty now, just a few technicians packing up equipment. Maya was waiting for me just inside the door. She didn't offer a hug or a comforting word, just a single, knowing nod. "You sure about this?" she asked quietly. "More than I've ever been about anything," I replied. I walked to the podium. No one tried to stop me. I placed the folder on the lectern and opened it. The remaining cameras, some still live streaming, turned toward me. "My name is Cora Sterling," I began, my voice clear and steady. "You didn't hear that name today, but it's the most important one in this story." I held up the first document. "This is a test result from the National Organ Registry, dated 6 months ago. It states, unequivocally, that I am not a compatible donor for Chloe Sterling." I held up the second. "This is a medical power of attorney, forged with my name, submitted to this hospital without my knowledge or consent." I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the room. "And this," I said, holding up the final report from Dr. Thorne, "is a genetic test confirming that I am not, and have never been, biologically related to the Sterling family. I was adopted. A fact they conveniently forgot to tell me. I was brought here under false pretenses, emotionally blackmailed, and assaulted when I refused to comply. They tried to use my body to fix a problem that was never mine to solve. They tried to erase me from their story, because the truth was inconvenient." A murmur rippled through the remaining press. Phones were raised. Flashes went off. I took one last, deep breath. I don't want an apology. I don't want revenge. I just want the silence to be over. I stepped away from the podium. In the front row, Beatrice, who had been listening from her seat, made a soft, choking sound and slumped to the floor. The thud was audible even over the rising din. Richard stood, his face a mask of disbelief, but the reporter's questions drowned out whatever he might have tried to say. One reporter called out to me, "Miss Sterling, what do you want now?" "Justice?" I turned back just once, my voice calm. "No," I said. "I want to never have to explain myself to them again." And I walked out, past the flashing cameras and the stunned faces, into the cool, clean air of the city. I was leaving a life that had never truly been mine, and for the first time, I felt completely, utterly free. A week later, I was sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The city hummed below, a steady, soothing rhythm. The media storm had raged, and then, as all storms do, it had quieted. The headlines had faded. "Adopted daughter exposes forgery in organ donation scandal." "Hospital launches full investigation into Sterling family." I didn't read the articles or the comments. I didn't need to. Beatrice had been hospitalized for what was officially termed stress-induced cardiac strain. I didn't know if it was real or one last performance. Richard had disappeared from public view. And Chloe, I'd learned, had been discharged quietly a few days ago. Her social media, once a curated gallery of smiling photos and inspirational quotes, had gone silent. For the first time in my life, I was the one who had the last word. That afternoon, a text message appeared on my new phone. It was from Chloe. "Can we meet? Just us. Please." I hesitated for only a moment before typing back. "Where?" "The hospital garden. South Path. 5 p.m. At 4:45, I walked into the garden. The sky was a soft, indecisive gray. Chloe was sitting on a bench under a cluster of birch trees, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her in a simple gray hoodie. She didn't stand when I approached, just looked up. I remained standing. After a long moment of silence, she spoke, her voice flat. "They only kept you in case I ever needed something." The words were brutal in their simplicity, but they didn't wound me. They were just the truth, laid bare. "I always thought you knew," she added quietly. "No," I replied, "but I always felt it." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was no fight left between us. No anger. Just the vast, empty space where a family was supposed to have been. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said, looking down at her hands. "Good," I answered softly. "Because I can't." The wind rustled the birch leaves above us. "But I hope you find something better than this," I found myself adding, the words surprising even me. Because what they did to both of us, it doesn't deserve to win. She didn't look up. I turned and walked away without another word. Some endings don't need a dramatic final scene. They just need to end. The next day, I went to the county clerk's office. I didn't file for a name change. Cora Sterling was the name I had built my life with, the name on my degree, the name my friends knew. It was my name, not theirs. I had reclaimed it. Walking through downtown Portland that afternoon, the world felt different. The buildings were the same, the people were the same, but I was not. I was no longer a shadow. That evening, a small, plain envelope was in my mailbox. There was no return address. Inside was a handwritten note on a piece of lined paper. Hi, Cora. I saw your story on the news. I'm adopted, too. I'm 17 and my family is complicated. I didn't know I was allowed to say no. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to have a voice. You gave me something I didn't know I was allowed to have, a choice. From someone who now knows she's not alone. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. Not in the folder labeled evidence, but in a new one for things I wanted to keep. It wasn't a record of my pain anymore. It was the beginning of my peace. Some families are built on lies. I would build my life on the truth. And that, I was beginning to understand, was more than enough. Sometimes, the hardest truth is the one we've always known in our bones, that love can be conditional, and family can be the source of our deepest wounds. But Cora's story is a powerful reminder that our voice is the one tool they can never truly take from us. Speaking our truth, even when our hands shake, is the first step toward healing and reclaiming our own narrative. Have you ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to see you most clearly? Share your story in the comments below. You are not alone, and your story matters.